Hi, welcome to the Rose at Home channel. I'm Rose. I am at home with my books, and today I am doing the book recommendations tag, and I'm really excited. Being one of the new kids on the block here on BookTube, I wanted you to be able to get a better idea of the kind of things that I read, the kind of things that you're going to hear about on this channel. I feel like I dabble in a lot of different genres, and hopefully you're going to find out that I read some of the things that you like, and you'll find some recommendations that work for you as well. So let's get started. The first question is, when someone asks you what's your favorite book, what is your response? And to be honest, my response is deer in headlights stare into the distance. Similar to that. Because my brain blanks, because I have so many. It depends on the genre, it depends on so many things. But when non-readers are like, well, what's your favorite book? What would you suggest that I read? I feel like it's everybody's. The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And if you have not read this yet or do not know what it is about a man named Linus, who I know a lot of people are like, oh, I love the kids, or I love the island. I love those things too, but I really love Linus. He is the sweetest, saddest man, and watching him come into his own as this book goes and have it happen so organically. It never seems forced, it never seems pushed. He just grows as a person and finds his own self-worth, and it's a beautiful, beautiful ride to get to go on with him. So Linus is kind of a pencil pusher, works in those little cubby cubicles for a government agency that is in charge of checking on magical children who have been removed from their homes and put into orphanages. And so he checks on the situation, he checks on their safety and all of that kind of stuff. And so he gets taxed by the upper management to go to a special orphanage that is kind of off the books, and that's supposed to have these like super, super dangerous kids. They're the best kids ever. They're wonderful. I know I'm not alone in loving this book, and I don't know if I love it more than others because of the teacher side of me. I understand the whole, well, this is a bad kid, this is a this kind of kid, this is a that kind of kid, and then you get them and they're just kids. They're like, none of that matters, and I think I can relate to that more than maybe other readers. I don't know, but this is absolutely 100% my most favorite book. It's the one that I recommend. I have bought copies of this for friends for Christmas since it's come out. Multiple friends. None of them have told me that they've read it, so that kind of makes me a little bit sad because I want everyone to read it and then get to have discussions about it. And so I absolutely love this book. The next question is a book that is a guilty pleasure, and I'm going to cheat this one a little bit. It's not necessarily a book, but I'm going to use a book or two books to show it. But guilty pleasure for me are murder mysteries. I love them cozy, I love them procedural, I love them noir. Murder books, that's that's my jam. If I really just want to escape into something that's just, you fall in and you're in this world, it's murder books. It's books where people get killed. I love the formula of it. I love that the beats that you have to hit when you've got a really good mystery going, and yet the ability for writers to still surprise and take you through the twists and turns. And so murder is definitely my guilty pleasure. And so the books that I want to talk about, because oh dear God, at these covers, this is Fortune Favors the Dead and Murder Under Her Skin. And I bought this one literally cover by, because look at that cover. Like, how cool is that? And the second one, there is a third one in the series so far, and they completely changed how they do the covers, and I'm kind of mad about it, if I'm being honest. I'm really mad. So I haven't bought that yet. I do want to read it though, and I'm gonna get over the cover thing. I'm gonna do my best to get over it. This series is set in the 40s in the US, and there is a female detective who is ill. I believe she has multiple sclerosis. She's got a degenerative kind of illness, and so she takes on an apprentice who was a knife thrower in the circus, and her apprentice is learning how to do all of the detective-y things, and so while she's being trained, they're also solving crimes, and they're so good. They're so different than normal. They follow the structure and yet throw the structure out the window. Like, I love that. I love the ride. I absolutely adore these. These are brilliant. And so if you like murder books, as I've had people in my life call them, you would really love these. Okay, I guess these tags can't exist without a little bit negativity, and sorry. So I'm sorry. I know people love this. It just wasn't for me, and the more I think about it, the more the parts I didn't like stand out to me, and that is Helen Huong's The Kiss Quotient. I enjoyed the writing. The writing was great. I enjoyed the couple. I enjoyed them together. I enjoyed them growing and learning from each other and finding things in the other person that makes them better and helps them on their personal growth. Like, all of that I loved. I can't get over the premise. I can't get over and I talked about this in my reading wrap up for May if you want to go back and watch that. I can't get over what got them together. I can't get over what she went through at her job. I can't get over how against character it is for her that they got together for that reason. I think there are other ways it could have been done and handled that would have been less negative. I have learned, and we'll talk about this when I wrap up June, because I read another romance with not exactly this, but another one where there are things in the premise where I'm like, no, this just is a no. So if you would like to see that, please go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you will get notified when that video goes up. It'll be at the end of the month. I am not giving up on Helen Huong. If I can find some that have a premise that's not as cringy for me personally, I really enjoyed the writing. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the way they grew as characters together. All of that was wonderful. The premise, I can't get past it. Book you read the fastest. And this goes back to my whole loving the murder books. So this is the Plum Pudding Murder by Joanne Fluke. I'm not sure that this is the one that was the fastest, but over Christmas, I got 3 or 4 cozy mysteries with Christmas as kind of a backdrop for them, and this was one of them, and I raced through this. It was so much fun. Just jump in, dive in. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't really a head scratcher, but it was just light and fun and a good holiday romp for all. And so I love the cozies. I don't read them as much as I used to, but I do really enjoy them. Book that deserves more hype. I do not understand how everyone and their cousin hasn't read these. These are so good. So good. And on Goodreads, none of them have more than 1,000 reviews. I'm assuming that the people who read them aren't necessarily Goodreads type people. I don't know, but y'all get on them because they're so good. And it is the Titanshade series from Dan Stout. So this is the first book, and it is called Titanshade. This is Detective Carter, and this is his partner Jax. So they are sci-fi fantasy meets police procedural bordering on noir detective series. So if you like sci-fi and fantasy and you like murder books, put them together, and this series there are 3. And so in the first one we have Agent Carter, or Detective Carter, Agent Carter is a Marvel thing. Detective Carter, who is kind of looked down on right now. He's had some stuff happen in his recent past that he's not really forgiving himself for, and others are also not letting him forget. He gets paired with Jax, who is a fresh out of the academy new detective. They are investigating the murder of a diplomat who is a squib, which is another race that exists on this planet. The world building in this is absolutely top notch. There's a full religion system, there's a full economic system, there's a full governmental system, but there's not a ton of like sitting you down and explaining it to you. It's all organically written throughout it, and I know how hard that is to do, and it's done brilliantly. It's a lot of fun. It's a great romp. It's a wonderful ride and adventure, and all 3 go together. I'm hoping that that's not the end, that it wasn't just a trilogy, but I don't know. It kind of ends where it could continue or it could stop. So the first one is Titanshade by Dan Stout, and then is Titan's Day, which is the second one. And so I'm not going to talk about this because you kind of need to know, you need to have read the first one. And then finally is Titan's Song, which is the one that came out the most recent. If you like detectives, if you like mysteries, if you like noir, if you're okay with some kind of gory murder scenes, read these. Everybody read these so that they'll have more of them, and his publishers will say, yes, please write more, because they're so good. You're missing out, I promise. The next prompt was a book that is becoming a movie or a television show. I'm kind of thwarting that one as well. This already is, but I really wanted to talk about it. It's one of my top reads so far this year. It didn't come out this year, but I read it in 2023, and it is Emily St. John Mandel's Station 11, which I believe is a series on Max, used to be HBO Max. I now totally have to see it. This was so good. It's weird for a dystopia because we've kind of had an apocalyptic event. There aren't a ton of people left. Everything's kind of fallen apart. But instead of kind of focusing on that event, we get the event, but we're really focused about 20 years in the future and what happens to humanity. And there's a traveling troupe of Shakespearean actors, which totally, that's where I would be, is going around and doing performances for people who are left in this, kind of world after the end of the world. And a lot of stuff happens. I'm not going to ruin it. There's a lot that's going on, but it's so good. It is so incredibly well written. And if you haven't read it yet, or you were afraid it was going to be too heavy being post-apocalyptic, it's not. There's heavy stuff, but it's just a beautiful book, and I cannot more strongly suggest it. So the next question is book you reread the most. And for me, this isn't going to seem like anything else that I've pointed to, but it's The Hunger Games. And I actually have I believe it was a 10th anniversary edition with these white covers and floppy paperbacks. And I absolutely love these. So if I'm super stressed out, if I'm not handling the world very well and I need to jump completely into something else, someone else's world, and stay there for a while, this is the series that I reread again and again and again, and it never gets old and it never gets boring, and I'm just in it and I'm always enjoying it. Prompt number 8 is a book that is not in your typical genre. I don't read a lot of horror. I know I also don't read a lot of romance, but I read even less horror. It's just not something that I gravitate toward. I absolutely loved The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This was so good. If you haven't already heard of this one, this came out a couple of years ago. It is a dual timeline where a young woman takes a job as a front desk clerk at a roadside motel. She ends up going missing. About 18 years later, her niece, in searching for her because her mother's whole life was spent kind of in a depression over not knowing what happened to her sister. So she goes to the town to investigate and ends up getting a job at the exact same hotel, doing the exact same job at the front desk and investigating. So we jump back and forth between the aunt's timeline and the niece's timeline and find out what happens. And there's a lot that goes on. It's so good. It's so well written. Normally with a dual timeline, sometimes I'm like, okay, can you hurry up? I want to get back to the other one. I was equally invested in both sides of this, and that's really difficult to do. So I loved this, and if you haven't read this yet, go get it. It's so good. The next question is a book that deserves all of the hype that it gets, and how can I not talk about The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo? I absolutely loved this. I think I have now read this 3 times. I read it and then I read it again, and then it was a book club pick. If you don't know, this is the story of, she's in her 80s, Evelyn Hugo, and she was a huge star through the decades in Hollywood, and she hires a young woman to interview her and tell her the story of her life, going all the way back to the 50s and how she came up through Hollywood and all the things she went through. You find out who the love of her life was. I've cried every time. It's beautiful. It's brilliant. Taylor Jenkins Reid has my heart after this. I love this book so much. It absolutely deserves every bit of hype that it gets. And if anything in that description sounds good to you, read it, because the writing is impeccable, the character development, the story moves not too fast, not too, everything is just chef's kiss when it comes to this, and I think you would love it too. The next question is a book that you normally recommend when asked to recommend a book. And so I picked a duology for this. I often get asked by my students, remember I teach 18-year-olds, so I'm looking for things that dabble a little bit in some of the stuff they're used to from YA, but then are actually adults, so they've got that stronger, a little bit more sophisticated writing style, but still has content and plot that they would enjoy. And so I have a lot that I recommend, but one of them that I do find myself recommending a lot is Vicious, and the sequel, which is Vengeful. So this is a duology. So in this story, we have two young men in college, and they're both brilliant, and they're trying to figure out how to become what are called EOs, extraordinaries. They're trying to basically get a power. Think kind of X-Men, where you can't do like a bunch of things, but you can do like one thing as your power. And so they're trying to find the way to get a power. What ends up happening is they end up absolutely hating each other, and each of them believing that they're the good guy in the story and that they need to kill the other one, that the other one needs to go for the betterment of mankind. It's great. It's very morally gray. It's got so much that just keeps you turning pages and turning pages. And it's got a wonderful writing style that's super, 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 super well done. And so if you're one of those people who's like, well, I like superhero movies, I don't know what to read, this is absolutely the very first thing that's on the top of my list to recommend. So the next question is a book that has your favorite character or characters, and I don't have all of them, but I've got a bunch of them, and it is the Murderbot series from Martha Wells. This is the first one, All Systems Red. It starts with 4 novellas, and then it goes into novels. I believe there's another one after this one that I still need to pick up. These are great, and I love the character of Murderbot. So Murderbot is a security bot, a security kind of android that was created to provide security on ships that are going out into space for scientific research. So they've got a bunch of scientists that are on the ships, and all of these ships, instead of being run by governments, they're run by different companies and corporations. And so to ensure that their scientists are safe and that their science is safe and that their discoveries are not like stolen and all of that, they have these security robots. So Murderbot is a security robot, but Murderbot has learned how to hack their own kind of brain. They've learned how to hack the chip that tells them that they have to do whatever they're told to do. So Murderbot now has free will. And at the very beginning, Murderbot is like, I guess I could just go on a rampage and kill a bunch of people, but I'd rather watch reality television, because they've also learned how to hack into the satellites that are broadcasting TV, and so they can watch TV in their head. And so they just sit for hours and hours and watch television and just kind of enjoy life. So the next question is a book you would like to live in, and a lot of my books have bad stuff going on in them, and so I don't necessarily want to live in places where there's a lot of murder happening and all of this craziness. But there are some books that have great characters so yes, Murderbot is my favorite character, but if I could just go and be friends with people and live in the world where they live, it would absolutely be the Brown sisters from Talia Hibbert's series. Get a Life, Chloe Brown, Take a Hint, Danny Brown, and Act Your Age, Eve Brown. These are so good. So these are all romances, but not one of them has a bad premise. They all have premises that make total sense, and you can root for everybody in them. And so I'm going to start with, you can read them in any order. They go together, but they're not necessarily dependent on each other. They don't necessarily build on each other, but timeline wise, it starts with Chloe Brown, so I'll just use that one for my description, is a woman who has a long-term illness. And so she has her good days where she's up and she's out and she's able to do things. And then she has days where she can't get out of bed because she's in so much pain. She's so exhausted. She realizes after a near-death incident, she almost gets hit by a car. It happens in like the prologue, so it's not spoilers. I think it's on the back of the book. So she almost gets hit by a car and she realizes that she's been living her whole life kind of letting her illness dictate it. And she hasn't been actually living a life. She's been just trying to get through this illness that she has. So she decides she's going to get a life. And she's like me. She just makes a list because that's what you do when you're trying to do something new. So she makes a list of all of these things that she wants to do in this new life. And it starts out with she's from a very wealthy family. She moves out of her family home. She gets her own apartment. And so she starts trying to date. She starts trying to make friends. She starts trying to do all of these things that other people who have lives have. And also in her building, there is a man there whose name is Red, who is an artist, and the sparks fly and hijinks ensue. And it's a great, great book. It's so much fun. Again, you can root for both of them. They're both really great people. And this whole series, I would love to be friends with the Brown sisters. I would love to live in this world and we're all buds and we're all hanging out and just having a great time because they're awesome, awesome people. The next question is a book that you thought you would hate but you ended up loving. And to be honest, I don't buy books that I think I'm going to hate. I don't read books that I think I'm going to hate. Life's too short and there are too many books in the world. But a few years ago, a group of friends and I got on Facebook in Messenger together and decided that we were going to read all of the shortlist books for the Women's Prize. So instead of really having a choice in what I was reading, I had to picked up all of them and read all of them and enjoyed them to different extents. But the one that I had no idea that I was going to love it, but I absolutely did, Unsettled Ground by Claire Fuller. This is a beautiful, beautiful book. It's quiet. It's very, very much about character, but there's still stuff that happens. It's not just a walking around talking book. So at the very beginning of the book, there's a set of twins. They're in their 50s. They still live on the family kind of farmhouse that's on someone else's land, but they still live in this little kind of farmhouse with their mother. She's in her 80s and she passes. And so they've never had regular jobs. They've not had education past the little village school. They've not really got a lot of friends. They don't really have a full life. And so now what do they do now that their mom is gone and they have to kind of start making their way in the world? And it's so good. I don't think I did it justice with that description. It's just, the writing is so beautiful. The characters are so realistic and there's so much to fall in love with the world of this book and what happens with them and all that they go through. It was my pick. That was a tough year. There were a lot of really good books and a lot of books that were louder, that were making a much bigger impression at the time. And this was just kind of that sleepy, like, wow book that was just kind of there. And it was my favorite of all of them, even though I loved I can't remember which one that won, but I loved the ones that won. I loved all of that. This is the one of them that stuck with me the most. The next question is a book that made you cry. And a lot of my books make me cry. I do tend to read a decent amount of literary fiction that tends to be sad. But the book that still makes me cry, even though I've read it over a dozen times, is 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. I teach this book. It is the last novel that we read as a full class with my seniors, and every time I get to the last line of this book, I choke up. It doesn't matter how many times I've done it. It moves me every single time. This is the story. I think the description sounds similar to The Kite Runner. It is set from the fall of the monarchy through the invasion of the Soviets into the civil war with the Mujahideen and then the takeover of the Taliban until 2003, after the Americans have come in. And so it follows that line historically, and it follows two women through that time. The first is Miriam, who we meet when she is 5, and we see everything that she goes through. And then when we hit part 2, we start seeing Layla or Lila. I'm not sure how, I always call her Layla. We see Layla and what she goes through, and they end up coming together, and it's all about found family and the importance of having those people that you love and overcoming so many things. It's just a beautiful, beautiful story. I have many, many students who were like, yeah, I didn't think I'd like it, but it's probably the best book I ever read. And I've also had kids who are like, it's the only one I ever actually read the whole thing. And that makes me sad because they're at the end of their high school education, and this is the beginning and not the end. But they read it and they love it and I love it, and I think you would love it if you haven't read it yet. The next question is a book that you wish you could read again for the first time. One that still sticks with me that I absolutely adored and hope to get to a point where I can read it again because I've forgotten enough of it would be Six of Crows and then Crooked Kingdom. And so when I first read these, I had them, I want to say in paperback. I found these, look at those, these beautiful editions were, I want to say at Barnes & Noble, and so I picked these up. So if you have not read this, these are fantasy, and there are certain expectations for fantasy, and it thwarts all of them. This is fantasy heist. So this is a ragtag group that's coming together to pull off the impossible heist. So take like an Ocean's 11 kind of thing and put it in a fantasy universe, and that's what you got, and I love that. This was fun from beginning to end, and you do have to, I ended up reading them back to back because this ends on quite the cliffhanger, so I had to immediately go in, but I wasn't mad about it. I was all about it. So I do hope to, I'll admit, I haven't read the rest because I've heard that the rest of it is more traditional fantasy and what you'd expect. It's not going to be as fun as this, and so I love these. Those are not all of my favorite books. I sat there at the end of it and I was like, wait a minute, my favorite series isn't here. My favorite, like, Neil Gaiman is one of my favorite authors. How do I not have one? There's just no way to talk about all of the books I love because I love a lot of books, but this was a good chunk, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you got a few things that maybe you hadn't thought of or that maybe predate you starting reading, and so you're gonna go and jump on those. I hope you really enjoyed this. I very much enjoyed getting to talk about these books with you. I really hope that I get to see you again. Please go ahead and subscribe if you have not already. I try to post every Wednesday and Sunday, and in the meantime, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful week and you get to read some absolutely wonderful books.